Everybody, welcome to this issue of Staffing Monthly. We are continuing on the trend of how do you make more placements? And as you know, I've been getting a lot of the questions lately about assessment tests and what am I using? And I've talked about that from the stages. I've talked about that with several of you one-on-one. I told you that I've used a lot of different things, and I eventually have migrated to doing something that we sort of developed in-house. And I will tell you this. I'm pleasantly surprised to find an assessment test company out there. And I can't really say it's an assessment test company. I'll call them an assessment company, a talent assessment company that actually does it the way that I think makes the most sense. And so I'm going to say it's the right way because you know that I like my model. It's been successful for us. But I actually stumbled across this company on LinkedIn. I had not known about them until recently, but it's actually a company called Recruiting Siftware. And I'll admit, and Paul, don't kill me for this one, but I actually thought it was a typo originally because I'm so used to seeing software. So nice play there. But for those of you out there, I actually found Paul Newman, who is one of the founders of Recruiting Siftware, and he is on the mission of having better assessments so we can find better talent, ultimately make better placements with our clients. So I just want to introduce you to Paul Newman from Recruiting Siftware. Welcome to Staffing Monthly.
Thank you, Dan, and nice to meet you all.
Man, I got to tell you. So I messaged you on LinkedIn and said, this is really cool what you're doing. And you hit me back. You had this really concise statement about what Recruiting Siftware is. So just for our audience sake, to set the table, like what is it? How would you describe Recruiting Siftware?
Okay, so Dan, so sort of ahead of this call, I was looking on YouTube and came across your interview that you did with Russ back at the end of December.
Yeah, Russ Liebitz, he's my guy.
Yeah, and you were talking about outcomes, about the problem you're solving is the person that does the job.
Yeah,
it's that work that they have to do. Do you remember what you were saying around that?
I do. That it's really what we sell is not the actual person itself, it's their output. It's what they do for the company. So our clients buy from us not who we place, but what who we place does for them. And that's ultimately what they're buying. So that means that's what we need to be selling.
That's right. So what intrigues me about the use of assessments is trying to find those A players. So what does good look like? So if you recruit in the average person that's out there on the market trying to get a job, you fill that role and you put an average person in, and they're maybe going to cover the cost of their salary with the work that they're doing. Our goal with Recruiter Siftware is to try and get to the person that does 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times their salary. That's what we're trying to do, is put effective people in, because people are assets, or the right people are assets.
Yeah.
So in terms of like a spectrum of sort of A players at one end, when you get it wrong, or you start recruiting mediocre people, or you start recruiting problem people, you end up with employee turnover, employee attrition, and that's a cost to the business. And that could be just as much as what the salary is, if not more, depending on what types of roles you're recruiting for. So our goal is really, with Recruiter Siftware, is to help recruiters and HR professionals screen people super quickly to try and find out how well they compare to the ideal candidate that the recruitment manager is hiring for. And that process should be done in partnership with the recruiter. And that's the whole idea with Recruiter Siftware, is that the tools are used to try and define good in tandem, in partnership with your hiring managers.
So I love that. One thing I want to mention, because one of the talks that I've given most often to like HR groups is about the talent stack, how we're out there, we're top grading our talent. We're looking at all the people out there and we grade them in like 4s and 5s and 6s or whatever. And you do this. And then you mentioned when you start bringing in mediocre player, it fuels turnover and attrition, which a lot of people are plagued with right now. But do you know who the first people to leave are out of the company?
I would probably assume your A players are leaving first.
They do. Because A players like to be around other A players. And when they see the organization bringing in not A players, it makes them nervous. And What's the worst about this one, Paul, is that because when the recruiters or HR, when they're grading the candidate pool, they might think they have an 8 player. They might grade someone an 8 or a 9 because they're benchmarking against the wrong thing, which we'll get to in a second. So they bring this 8 or 9 into the organization and they treat them like an 8 or a 9, and they think that they're an 8 or a 9 or an A player, right? They treat them like that, but they're really not, because they benchmarked them wrong and they're really maybe like a B or a C player. But then
Yeah.
the A player knows, because they know. And they're
Yeah.
like, why is this subpar person being treated like an A player? And they're really slowing us down. And that sentiment never gets captured or detected until the A player actually leaves. And then your overall performance will take a significant hit. And then the ship starts sinking. And the way that you typically get mediocre people out of your organization is either through PIP or layoffs, because it's just not performing and you need to, kind of right size the organization. So when you made that comment about attrition, most people think that you hire bad and the bad people leave first. No, you hire bad and the bad people stay and the good people leave first. And that's a terrible, terrible recipe.
Yeah. If you end up with sort of B, C's, D players, some of those are going to be sort of your toxic terrors, and your time wasters. But unfortunately, sometimes those are the people that stay, and that creates an even worse environment. So things go from bad to worse in that situation, and you end up with real people problems across your whole organization.
It's so true. It's so true. And what I used to do, and I've got one of my good friends now is what it was, an early sales mentor to me, and he had really taught me the concept of using a assessment tests to hire and build effective teams. And we use a combination of tests. I won't get into the specifics of them right now because I don't want anybody to think I'm speaking disparagingly, because I'm not. They're very good for what we did.
Yeah.
But all the tests they helped us out, but the one thing that we recognized is the benchmark was misplaced. So we actually, after seeing this, we started to realize what these tests were essentially going to tell us about a candidate. And then we made a shift and we changed what we benchmark our candidates against. And this is internally, just internal team building, just in transparency. We weren't doing this wholly for all of our contractors or placements that we send out of the building, but this was the one thing that I noticed about you that's different about Siftware, is the where you benchmark. So you said define good. So let's talk about that. What do you mean by defining good, and what are you actually comparing your benchmark? What's your benchmark with Siftware?
Yeah, so there's probably two ways of building a benchmark. One way is really to get your current employees assessed, and with some performance data, you can crunch through that data, work out what's different on the traits for each of those traits between the top performers and the poor performers. What is it they do differently that the poor performers don't do? And vice versa, and you can reverse that same thinking. But you work through that data, and then that very clearly tells a story in terms of, you're looking for someone with high conscientiousness or open-mindedness. They're very creative people. Depends on the context of the job role.
Right.
The other way that we do it now is we've developed a tool called Secret Sauce, which is about trying to find the key ingredients for exactly that. But when you haven't got the data, when you haven't got the employees, there's a brand new role, or you're a small company and you haven't got enough data points.
Yeah.
So maybe assess a couple of people, but the idea is to work with the hiring manager, the people that know what, or should know what good looks like, and if they don't know, be able to use the Secret Sauce tool to be able to define what good needs to look like for this role, just so we're clear when we go out and recruit, what types of people am I looking for? Because there's skills and experience, which is great, but then there's attitudes and behaviors, which is even better.
Yeah.
Best thing to have is when you've got the skills and experience and the attitudes and behaviors. So it's not a skills-based approach. It's not an attitudes-based approach. It's a skills and attitude-based approach, because you're looking for both of those things.
So how does that work? The secret sauce. That's interesting to me. Like, how does that actually work?
Okay, so it can be a survey you send to a hiring manager, or you can sit in parallel with the hiring manager, and you just work through a form. and you move the sliding scale to be able to define where you want the ideal score to be, depending on the trait. So, for example, we use we're a big 5 assessment supplier. Here comes Nigel joining us, my business partner, and you look in the context. So we don't use terminology like conscientiousness. We use terminology like planning and organizing. So are they detail orientated and dependable, or are they more carefree, impulsive, but good at multitasking? You know, what's the nature of the work? And it's always in the context of the job itself. You know, what does good look like in terms of planning and organizing? What does good look like in terms of making decisions and working with other people? What does good look like in terms of communicating? What does good look like in terms of team approach? What does good look like in terms of handling change? And it's about trying to move those score sliders to the area that you want. And then with the hiring manager's buy-in, you know, because they've been part of that process of defining good, you've then got your benchmark that gets submitted to us. We add that to the account, and you then assess every single candidate against that benchmark, and it gives you a percentage fit score. It's a bit like the film Moneyball, if you've seen that film.
I love that film.
I
I'm a
love that
data
film.
guy. I'm a data guy.
Exactly. It's the data. It's about trying to get down to one score. One score. You know, for them it was on base percentage. I think it was.
Yeah.
We don't have much baseball over here in the UK, but I think it's on base percentage that they were looking at. And for us, it's job fit score. You know, what is that person's fit with the job? If they fit that job well, then yes, they're more likely to become an A player. Hiring mistakes, you know, we were talking about employee turnover. That happens when you have mismatches. So if you've got a mismatch in your hiring of the type of person, so we were talking earlier about outcomes. You know, what is it the person's got to do? What does, you know, what's the problem that they're going to be solving?
Yeah.
We're asking, how are they going to solve that? If you were to see them doing it, what does that look like? And that percentage fit is saying, you know, 100%, that's the way they're going to solve that problem, you know, in the way that you want. If you've got a much lower job fit score, then that person's not necessarily right for that type of job. And that's why you end up with employee turnover and attrition and all the costs associated with that.
So I love that. So is it safe to assume that if you're working with maybe a more established organization that might have existing people in the same or similar roles that are an A player, that they could actually take that survey to create the benchmark as well? That way you're benchmarking against known successful producers in that organization, company culture, and specific role.
Absolutely. That's route one for us. We've done 600, 700 of those different studies, you know, anything from pilot to blackjack dealer for a casino in the US to care staff to close protection bodyguards, all sorts of stuff. You know, we've done so many different very little projects. You know, those are some of the outliers in terms of the cool ones. But even, you know, Google AdWord executives, you know, wherever you can get those sorts of data points, and you've got enough of that data that can come in. Typically, anything more than 30 sort of staff is really, really good. If you've got 300, even better.
Yeah.
But if you don't have that, that's why we have secret source, is to be able to. That's the second way of getting to that data. It's all about having that data-driven approach.
And that makes a ton of sense. And that goes back to where I was mentioning the reason that we moved away from kind of off the shelf assessments was because even though when we were doing it, they're like, hey, we assess these core competencies against known people in these roles, right? And it would tell you how they stack up against other people that might be a consultative salesperson or operations manager, right? By job descriptions, they would have some sort of profile in the back end that they would be benchmarking against. But then at some point in the process, we realized that those consultative salespeople have never really worked in our company, in our geography, with our clients, under our business strategy, under our leadership and management style, all of that stuff. So it's really, you don't know, they might be a match for that type of job, but they don't necessarily mean that they'd be a fit for us. So that's where we actually moved that model. And because we felt like the most important way to benchmark was against known producers in your company. That's going to give you the most accurate match, the apples to apples, as they say, right? To give you the best comparison. So I want to take a closer look at Siftware, because we had a very rudimentary, we just did a four score. We actually found kind of the four core competencies or traits or kind of, attitudes and behaviors of people that were top producers. And we plotted them on a couple different Foursquare tools just internally. And every time we interviewed people, we would have specific questions that we would ask that would indicate where they might fall in these two Foursquares. And they were things like, what's their management preference? Do they like to be micromanaged, or can they, be self-managed? And we're more of a self-managed organization, right? So like people that need micromanagement tend not to do as well with us. So we identified that, people that are like effective. This is a weird one. Like I've never seen the term effective on any assessment test, but you've probably seen these people, Paul, that you can have two people that can do the exact same amount of work the same way, say the same stuff, and for some reason, one of them just happens to be more effective. And I don't know what that is. Like there's no like really way to know. But when you interview people and you hear stuff that they've done and how the results that they've gotten and how those results might translate to your role, it's like, hey, this person is probably more effective, right? So like we just picked some of these traits that identified the top producers in our company, and that became our benchmark. So everyone that's coming in, they had to plot in a similar fashion to our known producers, and it worked out really well. And that's why I was excited when I saw that that's kind of the model that you're doing. So I think that's really cool. I see Nigel just joined us. Nigel, you're on mute if you want to. I heard you're getting ready to celebrate an important milestone, so I hope you're enjoying some time. But welcome to Staffing Monthly, and I appreciate you taking some time out of your day to talk about Recruiter Siftware.
Pleasure, Dan, and apologies. Yeah, so for some reason the link refused to open the first time round. So Paul has resent it to me, and it's managed to connect now. So yeah, we're away on vacation, and yeah, tomorrow is a big day for my wife. She has a big birthday tomorrow, so the family are gathering, and Paul will be taking the day tomorrow to travel down as well. So we're looking forward to a big family event. So and thank you. It's very kind of you to. I'll pass on your good wishes to make sure that everyone hears that we're wishing her a good day tomorrow.
Absolutely, and I think maybe that the link didn't work the first time was the universe's way of just saying, hey man, like just go enjoy family time. That's the priority of everything that we do in life. No need
Yes.
to get dragged into a staffing interview about what you're working on. But I'm grateful for your time and making an appearance, and it's pretty cool. So Paul was sharing with me some of the origin story about you working around the kitchen boardroom table, coming up
Yes.
with this idea years ago. So why was this important? Like, why did you think this was a problem that needed to be solved?
I suppose, Dan, it all stems on to the fact that as Paul may have explained, I was selected to be a military pilot many years ago, and one of the most important elements of the selection process is the thoroughness with which it's done. And they have a model which we laughingly call the controlled extrovert model. That's what they're looking for. Now, that doesn't explain the culture. Can the person work within the military framework? Can they operate within military constraints? But the beauty of it is that when I started working with psychometrics in civilian life, it became completely clear to me that, as Paul has so eminently explained just a little earlier in the conversation, that a person who doesn't fit the role, the mismatch between the individual and the role means that there could be not just a lack of productivity in terms of the employer, but of course the individual feels frustrated because they don't feel happy, they don't feel comfortable, they suffer from stress or anxiety because they're not delivering, they're not achieving the results. So we started as an organization that provided help and training, and that gradually morphed, as you know, into psychometrics, helping to put data and science behind our assertions. And here we are, nearly 30 years later, 20 something years later.
I love it. I love it. And the one thing that I find this so important, and I love that you guys are helping recruiters out with this, is that the most effective companies know how to get the right people in the right roles, doing the right things the right way to get the right results. And I was at a conference, we hosted a conference in Dallas a little while ago, and we had Sean Nix from Solar Development that walked our entire group through that concept about how do you get the right people in the right roles, doing the right things the right way for the right results. And it's one of those things that it's common sense, like intuitively or inherently, like we all know that that's what we're going for. Yeah, but for some reason we don't apply the right assessments. Like we don't take the right steps to get the right people into the right roles. And if you don't have that, it's very hard to get them doing the right things the right ways, which means it's impossible to get the right results.
Sure. And of course, Dan, we are working with human beings, human nature being what it is. There's things like bias that crop up all the time, and personal preferences, liking bias, and all of that gets in the way, and we can't change it. We can only help it.
Right.
You know, we can't stop people being people and having their own particular foibles when it comes to recruitment practices. But what we can do, and I love your comment early on when I first joined, which is I'm a data guy. You know, let's give them some data, because then they can make decisions, informed decisions that are based on data, not just on the fact that the guy had a firm handshake or he wore the right kind of designer clothes or whatever. You know, it's about, does the person have the capability to meet the demands of the job? Yeah. Now let's look at all the different people that could do the job to see which one is the best for our fit for our culture and our organization. So again, I concur entirely with your premise earlier that you've got to, you know, we've got to look at the right all the way through, the right person, the right time, the right type of role that they do, and such. So it's really important.
Yeah, and you also find that there's things like ego and judgment that come into play with things like hiring managers, and it's, you know, if they're inexperienced, you know, we've all got our unconscious biases, so it's about sometimes knowing about some of those things, but we start using our ego or judging people or preconceiving the interview. You know, when candidates are going through to interview stages, you know, we're looking at appearance and we're making a judgment call. Does this person look like the kind of person? You know, the CV. Have I fallen in love with some keywords on the CV and got someone in for an interview? And because they've worked at our main competitor and held a senior role there, they're going to be great for us. And you realise that you've had a thought and you believed that thought subjectively. What we're trying to do is objectify the recruitment process and actually say, well, what does the data say in terms of what you're trying to do here? So instead of using our gut feel, we're actually trying to use our heads and actually look at the data.
I like the approach, and one thing I've said many times over the years is there's no such thing as a 10 on your top grading scoring. A 10 is only a 9 in the right environment. And when you hire a 10 and you think you're going to bring them from a competitor over to your organization, they're going to be a 10, prepare to be woefully disappointed, because if you don't have the same environment that elevated to the 10, you might actually take that 9 down to a 7 or a 6 or somewhere in that range, and they just will not stand it. It just will be, you know, anxiety and stress throughout the organization. So I love that. I want to bring this back to the recruitment industry for a second, because there's something on your website that I really appreciated, and I'm going to get a link to it on this page here. But you've got this guide, and it's titled "Why Your Clients Reject Good Candidates and What You Can Do About It." Obviously, if this is the guide, if this is the thing that you're giving away and you're sharing, can you talk a little bit about your findings about why? What's in the guide? Just a little bit of an overview of like what people can expect to get when they learn this, because I think that's a frustration for many people in the recruiting industry. When we know, we're professionals, like we know that they would be an amazing candidate, and the hiring manager we're working with is like, no, we're going to pass on them. And it's like, it's frustrating. It's like, what, give me an overview of what's in this guide that can be helpful to the recruiter that goes and downloads this.
Well, probably one of the main concepts in that guide is that you're getting candidates rejected, or you're having to do rebates and rework, and that's another issue. But you're getting candidates rejected, and it's because you know that you've got a good candidate here, but it's that your hiring manager can't see what you can see. So how do you convey that? And again, it's about how you prove that you've got the right candidate. So you're trying to demonstrate. So if we remember when we were talking about secret sauce, that hiring manager buy-in into that part of the process in terms of defining good is so key, because they're putting their name to that. That's what you're going to go out and screen candidates against. When you've then got that tool there with the hiring manager, and then you're assessing all those candidates against that, and then screening those and bringing the people that match the best, you've got a way of talking about it with them. Not saying, oh yeah, I had a 1 hour interview with this person, I've spoken to them on the phone a couple of times. That's great, and carry on doing that anyway, because that's important. You've got to talk to your candidates, but they're just words.
Right.
How do you externalize it and actually put it on a piece of paper and say, that benchmark you designed, here's how they fit. You can see that they score in all the green areas. So this is going to indicate that, they're going to be a good fit for the role. Recruiter Siftware even goes one stage further than that, because it also has one-way AI-powered video interviewing as part of it. So anyone with a score, you pick a cutoff score with your hiring manager and say, look, tell you what, anyone scores above 85%, 90%, will automatically invite them to a one-way video interview and ask them competency-based questions, so that we can actually verify. We call it video verify. So we can actually verify that they've got those competencies. So they say, on their assessment results, they're an 8 or a 9 on this particular scale. Okay, well, let's ask them this video interview question and actually hear what evidence they can provide to prove that that is their level of fit on that scale. And we do that for each of the scales.
Wow. So that can be part of your candidate presentation packet. When you're submitting candidates, you can say, here's their kind of snapshot profile, how they fit against the role. And because they were above that 80%, 85, 90% or whatever threshold, here's the video so you can see how they actually responded contextually to some of these, clarifying questions. So you actually have that extra firepower, if you will, when you present your candidate to the client.
Yeah, that's all automated. So anyone that scores above that, automatically invited through to the video interview stage. You get that. It brings the applicant to life. You get to see the person behind, which is so important in advance. And it's about, rather than trying to find the needle in the haystack, it's about putting the whole haystack through. Just put the whole haystack through, and the ones that fit the best, work on those. That's where to spend your time as a recruiter, is on those people.
I think
there was a colleague of ours called a fee on legs. That's your fee on legs right there for that, filling that role. That's your fee on legs.
That's funny. Nigel, you were saying?
I was just going to say, during the marketing research we did before we marketed the package, the Recruiter Siftware package, two things came to mind. We came up with this phrase of evidence-based recruiting. So again, this plays into the question, I think, and answers some of the question, because we have actually sort of trademarked the phrase, we can prove it. It's a prove it system. In other words, we can convince the hiring manager that between us, we have shown you what you've told us you wanted. So we've proved, like a evidence-based law case, we've proved that the statement made by the defense is true, or the prosecution, or whatever. But it's prove it evidence-based. It's we show you, we prove that that's the case. You are looking for this type of person with this distribution of competencies, this kind of culture fit. Now we can prove it. It's evidence-based.
I love that. So let me ask about one more use case as we're winding our time down here that I think would be fascinating. So a lot of times in sales or selling, we do skill-based marketing, right? So we'll take a candidate that matches an open role that we're trying to prospect into, and we will basically market them to prospects and say, here, this is a candidate that matches your role. So would we have the ability to see one of these profiles, almost like a blind submission profile, and actually send that out and say, hey, we have a candidate for your role that you have open on your website, and we're very familiar with recruiting that role. We're familiar with your company. You know, we worked in similar situations, and here's a candidate that would actually be an A player in that role as evidence-based skill marketing. Is that another use case that could be done, or you see some of your clients using these reports for?
Absolutely. I think that would be a great way of using it. The benefit of that is, not only can you sort of highlight their skills, you can also highlight their behaviors, and how well they fit a particular type of role. And if you are in your particular niche, specializing in a particular sector, and you really understand the roles there, you can go and build out a number of secret sources for the key 10 roles that you recruit for. You then hold that to yourself. It becomes an asset for your company. Secret source is an asset for your company, because every time someone wants, say, an operations director in the manufacturing business, you've got that. You know exactly the type of person they're looking for, and you can demonstrate it.
I love that. I love that. I think this is great. I want to. How long does it take to do a survey? Out of curiosity, if I just send this over to a hiring manager, how long does that survey take to kind of get that secret sauce benchmark?
You could probably go through the secret sauce benchmark process in terms of completing the online tool. That would probably take about 5-10 minutes.
Okay, not bad at all.
Not long at all. You may want to spend longer over it and really consider it, in terms of, maybe get some colleagues together and actually have a discussion around it. But my recommendation would be that it's recruiter led, that they do it in partnership, because that's the key bit. It's about
so you might actually have like the recruiter do like an interview with the hiring manager, say, hey, do you mind if I just kind of ask you some questions about this role just to get a benchmark, and then just ask them, and then the recruiter sort of completes it, and then at the end you've got this benchmark that you can send over and say, hey, based on the findings of our interview that we had, here's what we're going to benchmark the candidates against. Yeah, that's a novel approach. I like that, because we're already doing those intake calls anyway, getting the job criteria.
Exactly. You're already doing the briefing, getting the briefing. Just it dovetails into that. That's the whole reason why we built Secret Source, was to be able to have that conversation and complement it in the way that recruiters needed it to work. Because not, like I said at the beginning, not many people have got enough people in roles for you to be able to build your own benchmark. What if it's a brand new role? So it became a really key part of our product development, was to look at how we build out Secret Source so that clients can tell us what that needs to look like, what good looks like.
We did it recently, Dan, and we did. We were looking for a college principal, and we did exactly as Paul described. We discussed over a conference call all the aspects of the profile and completed the secret source for the client. So it was a guided interview, if that makes sense. We guided them through the process, and they said afterwards they described it as a one-hit wonder, because the candidate that came forward matched the profile exactly, and they made the appointment, and they've never looked back. So that made us look pretty good.
Brilliant. I love it. Well, this has been great, guys. I'm grateful for your time. If anybody wants to check this out further, like I said, I'll get the link to that free guide, because I think that this is it's hitting a real pain point in our industry about how do you get your hiring managers to take more of your good candidates. And I like that you can show evidence-based definition of what good is. But if they want to reach out to you directly, get more information about this, or maybe actually demo the Recruiter Siftware, what's the best way to reach out to you?
LinkedIn, look us up on LinkedIn, Paul Newman, or Recruiter Siftware, or go to recruitersiftware.com.
Awesome. I'll get all these links on page. Thank you so much for your time, gentlemen. And I truly hope that you have an amazing, amazing day, amazing week with family together and get some time to recharge. And I look forward to connecting soon.
Thank you, Dan. It's been a pleasure to meet you.